This is the breakdown of the global economy in terms of countries around the world. So those percentages are in terms of the makeup of global GDP. The US, of course, is in there at number 1. You can see 26.1%. China is in second at 16.9%. The US actually gained 1% market share from China over this last year. If you looked at this chart just a year ago, the US was down at 25%, while China was up at 18%. So the US actually gained some market share this year. As you go around this pie chart, you can see the largest countries in terms of GDP. What's really interesting about this is if you look at just the United States, China, Germany, and Japan, you're capturing 50% of global economic output, just those 4 countries, right? I think that puts some things in perspective. But then when you include the rest of North America and the European Union, you're capturing more than 75% of global economic output. Folks, I can assure you in our lifetime, pending some major war, we will never see China surpass the US. Not in your lifetime, not in my lifetime. We will never see China surpass the US. We're quite concerned about China moving forward, actually. And most of my individual companies that I work with are finding ways to diversify away from China as we sit here today. Big demographic problems. We're going to talk about demographics throughout the presentation today. China and Japan in particular, some big demographic challenges facing their economies here in the future. And that's why we're quite concerned about those areas of the global economy. But anyway, I wanted to give you some perspective about the biggest players. Because up next, what I'm showing you is the growth rates for the global economy. Dark blue is the US economy. That teal color is the global economy. Of course, you would expect the US economy to move in alignment with the global economy, given we're the largest portion of it, right? But what I want you to focus on is the most recent data. Notice how close the growth rates are to 0. In the case of the US, actually below 0. If you look at industrial output around the world and in the United States, you can see some of the weakness in the growth. As we came out of that pandemic downturn, we accelerated in our pace of growth. Then these growth rates hit a peak in 2022 and had been slowing down ever since. And now you can see the growth rates starting to cross below 0. Now for the US and global economy, we do expect mild contraction throughout 24. But again, I want to put this in perspective. We expect the US to be down 1% in 2024. If you look at that pandemic downturn, that was about 8% down. If you look at the financial crisis in 08-09, it was about 12.5% down. So even though this data will technically show an industrial recession in 2024, 1% down is a lot different than the downturns that we've been through here in the past. And so that's why when we talk with our clients about some weakness in 24, it's apparent. You can see it on the chart. But I don't want you to think this is the bottom falling out like some of these past cycles. That's why I included all this data history. Again, 1% down is the worst that we'll see in the US and in the global economy. And so even though there's some weakness, I hope you're treating these next 12 months much differently. It's not a time to pull back. It's a time to invest and be preparing for growth. So 24, we have 1% down. 25, we have 2% up. 26, we have 2% up. And that growth continues through 27, 28, and 29. So it's just this mild dip in 24. That's all we're talking about. A little bit of a slowdown as we figure out inventories and adjust to this new reality. But we have 5 consecutive years of growth as we come out of 2024. So you should be thinking about, how do I take advantage of a slower year to prepare my business for 5 consecutive years of growth? I also wanted to talk about the global supply chain. That dark blue line is the supply chain pressure index. Notice the uptick in that dark blue line between 2020 and really most of 2023. That highlights how disrupted the supply chain was. Anytime that dark blue line's above 0, it's telling you the supply chain is disrupted. If you look at the most recent data today, we're hovering right around that 0 line or slightly below 0. So what I'm telling you is that dark blue line, that pressure index, says there's not much pressure on the supply chain as we sit here today. I hope you're all feeling a relatively normal supply chain. That's what the data here would suggest. But that green line here, that's the Purchasing Managers Index. That's a manufacturing leading indicator. And that does suggest that as the economy heats up into 2025, be prepared for slightly more supply chain disruptions than what you might have experienced over the last 12 months. That's going to be very important. But again, I think the good news is the supply chain's in a much different spot today compared to where we were. And you can see that from looking at the data on the chart. So I'm not concerned about the supply chain as we look at the remainder of 2024, but as the economy heats up in 25 and 26, that's when we should be a little bit more worried and more prepared for some disruptions in the supply chain. That's what happens when demand picks up, right?